Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in Russia as we speak, getting ready to meet with Russian officials. Whether or not Vladimir Putin will be there, anyone's guess. That is as each side, the U.S. and Russia, ratcheting up the rhetoric over the situation in Syria. A war of words brewing between the United States and Russia.
Russia has really aligned itself with the Assad regime, the Iranians, and Hezbollah. We want to create a future for Syria that is stable and secure. And so Russia can be a part of that future.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson drawing a line in the sand over Russia's support of Syria. The Russian President Vladimir Putin standing firm. In a news conference saying the accusations against the Assad regime over a chemical weapons attack resemble claims made against Iraq before the U.S. invasion in 2003. Meanwhile, the White House is accusing Russia of trying to cover up what happened, and Press Secretary Sean Spicer saying Russia should consider which side it's on.
You know, you had someone as despicable as Hitler who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons.
A comment that has drawn swift blowback and also raising eyebrows. An apparent White House confirmation that President Trump's daughter Ivanka influenced last week's decision to launch 59 Tomahawk missiles.
That being said, there's no question that Ivanka and others weighed into him as you know.
And for more, let's bring in our guest, Matthew Schmidt. He's an assistant professor of national security and political science at the University of New Haven. Matthew, good talking to you as always.
You too.
So either the president looked at a set of photos and had the biggest 180-degree policy shift in terms of what U.S. interests are outside of the continental United States, what our line of threshold is, where we put culpability on Russia, what we view Assad as acceptable or not to be in Syria, or I'm looking at kabuki theater here where I'm told, don't really watch this, look at the shiny object to the side. What's going on here? Because if I left for a week and came back, I wouldn't know what I was looking at.
I think you nailed it, that essentially what the president had here was an emotional reaction to what he saw on television. Frankly, it's an emotional reaction that I think anybody would have. As a father, those pictures of the dead twins is just heart-wrenching. The question is, though, has he taken this action with some kind of policy in mind, with some kind of plan, some kind of deeper strategy? And we simply haven't seen anything yet. And I think that's what's worrying everybody. We understand that there's a rationale for taking this decision, but it clearly goes against everything that candidate Trump said. It goes against what his own Secretary of State said just a few days before. And so there's all sorts of contradiction now between what the Secretary of State is saying, what the president is saying, and of course, what Nikki Haley is saying at the United Nations, the ambassador there.
So which one is it? You have Rex Tillerson, who had the Medal of Friendship or whatever that Putin gave him from his times when he was at Exxon, and now he's saying that not only does Assad have blood on his hands with these chemical bombings, but Russia was either complicit or ignorant as he goes about setting foot on Russian soil today. Again, I'm trying to figure out, there seem to be a whole bunch of agendas here at play. What's going on?
I think that Russia was not complicit in the attack directly, but they certainly were complicit indirectly, which is to say that they must have known what was going on at that airbase once the Assad regime started loading those aircraft. They probably knew if there were chemical munitions beforehand. But, so I think that they are definitely to blame for those deaths. They bear that. In addition, we fired, 59 cruise missiles at about $2 million a pop. And the Russians are flying sorties out of this base already by the end of the weekend, right? And so, again, the question is, what difference is this actually making? Is this just an expression of rage? And is it worth it? And what kind of risk does it put us into in the larger region? And what kind of message is Secretary Tillerson taking into Moscow, today, where we understand that President Putin's not even going to meet with him, right? So this tells us something about the ability of our State Department right now to get access to foreign leaders that we need access to.
You probably saw what King Abdullah out of Jordan said, where he proposed a horse trade, if you will, which is, okay, maybe what the U.S. ought to do is let Putin have Crimea, that province of the Ukraine, and also lift sanctions. And as a result, Russia will back off its support for Assad and basically grease the skids here to get him out of the way there in Syria. If that's what this was partially about here, what's your reaction, certainly as somebody who knows that region very well?
My reaction is Crimea isn't the Saudis to give away, right? It's Ukrainian territory, and the Ukrainians have not given up their legal claim to that peninsula. And again, I don't believe in the end that this is what Russia is in Syria for, right? Let's link all these things together for a minute. Look at Syria, look at Ukraine, and look at Libya, and look at Iraq. The reason that Vladimir Putin is there in Syria is to signal to the West, primarily to the United States, that it cannot commit regime change. It cannot get rid of the Assad regime. Just like it got rid of the regime, the Gaddafi regime in Libya, or like it got rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or like Putin accuses us of doing, of trying to get rid of the regime in Ukraine.
Is it important, not just for us as U.S. citizens, but also for our allies and even our enemies, that there is a clear policy by the president? So just yesterday, Sean Spicer in a briefing basically set a line. Well, it wasn't just chemical weapons. If barrel bombs go out here, that's our red line. There we go. Before the end of the day, the White House distanced himself from that statement. The president, as you mentioned, he campaigned on an isolationist theme and a nationalist one, that I'm not the president of the world here. I'm the president of the U.S., and I'm not going to go forget about regime change. Let them sort it out wherever they are. And then we saw what we saw in Syria with those 59 Tomahawk missiles. So what I'm asking is, there's two theories. The madman theory, that you scare everybody because you don't know what the guy's going to do next and it'll make them think twice. And then the madman theory, because there's really a madman, we don't really have a plan. Do we need to know which of the two it is?
Yes, I think you do. First of all, the madman theory might work if you're not the United States of America. But there's a thing called the Pax Americana, right? This great peace amongst the great powers of the world that has prevented a major war from happening since the end of World War II. In some cases, the longest period of peace at that level since the 1100s or the 1200s, right? Almost 2,000 years we're talking about. And why is that the case? It's because the United States of America has been a consistent, right, and predictable leader in world events. It upholds its values more often than it doesn't, right? And people understand the directions and the policies of United States leadership in all parts of the world so that we can build alliances and build stability. If the United States plays the madman theory, that whole system falls apart. And when that system falls apart, now you have different strongmen in different parts of the world, like in Russia, like in Turkey, right? And they can come together and dictate events in that region in a way that they can't if we're there with strength and with consistency towards our values. So it's extremely dangerous to me that the administration either is trying to play the madman on purpose, or what I think is really happening is reacting emotionally and then trying to tack on a policy afterwards, a policy that, frankly, is not enforceable. The point of this, the point of those 59 cruise missiles, is to make this guy change his behavior, stop gassing his own citizens. It's not going to work.
We don't know how this plays out here, but by the day, it gets more complicated as well as also more compelling. Matthew, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Richard.
And coming up next, top White House advisors Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner, they are still feuding. So if Kushner wins out, betting money he will, the question is, will Bannon be on his way out? We'll talk about that after this.